The morning sun cast long shadows across Elm Street and Cedar Falls, and the only sound breaking the suburban silence was the rhythmic hammering coming from my backyard. I'd been putting off fixing our old wooden fence for months, but with summer, break stretching ahead of me and my parents threatening to dock my allowance, I finally dragged myself outside with a toolbox and whatever determination I could muster. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Tyler Martinez, and at 19, I was caught in that awkward space between being treated like a kid and expected to act like an adult. College wasn't starting until fall, which meant I had 3 months of freedom that my parents were determined to fill with character-building activities, also known as home improvement projects I'd been avoiding since sophomore year of high school. The fence separating our property from the house next door had seen better days. Years of Colorado weather had warped the boards, loosened the nails, and left gaps wide enough for our neighbor's cat to slip through and terrorize my mom's vegetable garden. What started as a simple nail-tightening job quickly turned into something more complicated when I realized half the posts were rotting at the base. I was crouched down, trying to pry loose a particularly stubborn board, when I heard footsteps on the other side. Through one of the gaps, I caught a glimpse of someone moving around in the neighboring yard. A woman I'd seen before but never really paid attention to. She was tending to what looked like an impressive flower garden, her movements graceful and deliberate as she moved from plant to plant with a watering can. Our families had been neighbors for about 5 years, ever since my parents bought the house when I was 14, but we'd never really interacted beyond the occasional wave. I knew her name was Elena Hartwell, that she lived alone, and that she kept her property immaculate. My mom had mentioned once that she was divorced and worked from home doing something with graphic design. But beyond that, she remained largely mysterious. The sound of my hammer must have caught her attention because suddenly I heard her voice, from the other side of the fence. "Sounds like someone's doing some serious construction over there." Her voice had a warm, slightly amused quality that made me pause mid-swing. I stood up, brushing sawdust off my jeans, and peered through the gap between the boards. She was closer now, maybe 3 feet away on her side of the fence, and for the first time I got a proper look at her. Elena Hartwell was nothing like I'd expected. Sure, I knew she was older, probably around my mom's age, but there was something vibrant about her that caught me off guard. Her dark hair fell in loose waves past her shoulders, and she had these expressive brown eyes that seemed to hold a hint of mischief. She was wearing gardening clothes, old jeans and a faded blue t-shirt, but somehow made them look effortless rather than sloppy. "Just trying to fix this disaster before it falls down completely," I replied, gesturing at the sagging fence section. "Though I'm starting to think it might be easier to just build a new one from scratch." She laughed, and the sound was unexpectedly musical. "I've been watching it lean a little more each winter. I kept waiting for someone from your family to tackle it." She paused, studying the damaged boards. "You know, I've got some experience with fence repair. My ex-husband used to start these projects and then abandon them halfway through, so I learned to finish them myself." There was something matter-of-fact about the way she mentioned her ex-husband. No bitterness or sadness, just a simple statement of fact. It made me curious about her story, but I didn't want to pry. "Any advice for a complete amateur?" I asked, holding up the hammer like it was a foreign object. "First rule of fence repair," she said, grinning, "is that it's always worse than it looks. Second rule is that you'll need twice as many trips to the hardware store as you think." She gestured toward the rotting post I'd been struggling with. "That one's completely shot. You'll need to dig it out and replace it entirely." I groaned dramatically. "And here, I thought I'd be done by lunch." "Oh, you sweet summer child," she said with mock sympathy. "This is at least a 2-day project. Maybe 3 if you want to do it right." Something about her tone, playful but not condescending, put me at ease. Most adults either talked down to me or ignored me entirely, but Elena seemed to be treating me like an actual person. It was refreshing. "Well," I said, "I guess I better get comfortable with this toolbox. Then, any chance you'd be willing to share some of that expertise? I promise I'm a quick learner." She considered this for a moment, then walked over to the gate that connected our 2 yards. "Tell you what," she said. "I was about to take a break anyway. Why don't I come take a look at what you're working with? Fresh eyes and all that." The gate between our properties had been installed by the previous owners, though it was rarely used. Elena pushed it open and stepped into our yard, and I realized this was the first time we'd actually been in the same space. She was taller than I'd expected, probably 5'7", and moved with a confidence that suggested she was comfortable in her own skin. She examined the fence with the practiced eye of someone who'd dealt with similar problems before, running her hands along the boards and testing the stability of the posts. "Okay," she said finally. "The good news is that most of the fence is salvageable. The bad news is that you've got 3 posts that need to be completely replaced, and about 6 boards that are beyond repair." "How can you tell all that just by looking?" I asked, genuinely impressed. "Experience," she said with a slight smile. "Plus, I made every possible mistake when I was learning. Trial by error, mostly error." She pointed to where one of the posts met the ground. "See how this one wobbles when you push on it? That means the concrete footing has failed. And these boards here." She tapped several weathered planks. "They're so warped that even if you straighten them, they'll just warp again with the next weather change." I followed her explanations, trying to absorb the information while also being distracted by how animated she became when talking about something she clearly understood well. Her hands moved expressively as she spoke, and there was an enthusiasm in her voice that made even fence repair sound interesting. "So, what's the game plan?" I asked. "First, we need to get the right materials. That means a trip to the hardware store for posts, boards, concrete mix, and probably a dozen other things we haven't thought of yet." She glanced at her watch. "It's still early. If you want, I could ride along and help you navigate the lumber yard. Those places can be intimidating if you don't know what you're looking for." The offer surprised me. I'd expected maybe some advice over the fence, not an offer to actually help with the project. "You don't have to do that," I said. "I mean, I appreciate the advice, but I don't want to take up your whole day." "Honestly," she said, and there was something almost vulnerable in her tone, "I don't have anything pressing today. Working from home means I set my own schedule, and I finished my current project yesterday. Besides," she added with a grin, "it's been ages since I've had an excuse to play with power tools." There was something infectious about her enthusiasm, and I found myself nodding before I'd really thought it through. "Okay, that would be great actually. Fair warning though, I'm driving my mom's Honda, so it's not exactly built for hauling lumber." "No problem," Elena said. "I've got a pickup truck that's been criminally underused since the divorce. It'll be nice to actually put it to work for once." We agreed to meet in her driveway in 20 minutes, which gave me just enough time to clean up, change into a shirt that wasn't covered in sawdust, and leave a note for my parents explaining where I'd gone. As I walked around to Elena's driveway, I realized I was more excited about this hardware store trip than I'd been about anything in weeks. Elena's house was a mirror image of ours, but felt completely different. Where our yard was functional but unremarkable, hers was like something out of a gardening magazine. Flower beds overflowed with colors I couldn't even name, and everything was arranged with an artist's eye for composition and balance. The pickup truck sitting in her driveway was a forest green Ford that looked well maintained, but clearly wasn't just for show. She emerged from her house carrying a leather messenger bag and wearing sunglasses that somehow made her look even more put together. "Ready for the exciting world of lumber purchasing?" she asked. "I've never been so eager to spend money on wood in my life," I replied, which made her laugh. The drive to Morrison's Hardware took about 15 minutes, and we spent most of it talking about the neighborhood, local businesses, and the quirks of homeownership. Elena had a way of asking questions that made me feel like my opinions actually mattered, and she shared stories about her own home improvement disasters that had me laughing despite myself. "The first time I tried to install a ceiling fan," she said as we pulled into the hardware store parking lot, "I somehow managed to wire it backwards. Instead of cooling the room, it was actually heating it up. Took me 3 days to figure out why my electric bill had doubled." Morrison's Hardware was one of those old-school places that had been family-owned for decades, where the employees actually knew what they were talking about, and the aisles were narrow enough that you had to turn sideways if 2 people were passing each other. Elena clearly knew her way around, greeting several of the staff by name, and navigating directly to the lumber section. "This is Harold," she said, introducing me to a grizzled man in his 60s who was manning the lumber yard. "He's forgotten more about wood than most people ever learn," Harold looked me up and down with the skeptical expression of someone who'd seen too many weekend warriors bite off more than they could chew. "First fence project?" he asked. "Is it that obvious?" I replied. "Usually it is," he said with a slight grin. "But you brought Elena, so you're already ahead of the game. She knows what she's doing." For the next hour, Harold and Elena walked me through the selection process for fence posts, explaining the differences between treated and untreated lumber, the importance of proper measurements, and the various hardware options for securing everything together. It was like getting a crash course in construction from two professors who actually wanted me to succeed. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. We loaded the truck with everything we'd need: posts, boards, concrete mix, new hardware, and several tools that Elena insisted were essential for doing the job right. By the time we were finished, the bed of the pickup was full, and I had a much better understanding of why this was going to take more than one day. "Last stop," Elena announced as we climbed back into the truck. "Coffee and planning session." She drove us to a small cafe called The Grind that I'd passed dozens of times but never entered. It was the kind of place that attracted freelancers and remote workers, with mismatched furniture, local art on the walls, and the kind of atmosphere that encouraged people to linger over their drinks. We found a table near the window, and Elena ordered something complicated with multiple adjectives while I stuck with a basic black coffee. As we waited for our drinks, she pulled out a small notebook and started sketching what appeared to be a plan for the fence repair. "Okay," she said, "here's what I'm thinking. We tackle this systematically. Remove the damaged sections first, then prep the post holes, set the new posts, and finally install the new boards. If we work efficiently, we can probably finish the whole thing by tomorrow afternoon." I watched her draw, impressed by how quickly she could translate the three-dimensional problem in our backyard into a clear, step-by-step plan on paper. "You really know what you're doing," I said. "I've had plenty of practice," she replied. "When you live alone, you either learn to fix things yourself or you go broke paying contractors." She looked up from her sketch. "Plus, there's something satisfying about taking something broken and making it work again. It's tangible progress, you know? Unlike most of the work I do on computers, where everything's virtual." Our drinks arrived, and we spent the next 30 minutes going over the details of the project. Elena had thought of things that never would have occurred to me. The importance of checking property lines, the need to call utility companies before digging, the proper technique for mixing concrete. She made it all sound manageable, breaking down what had seemed like an overwhelming task into a series of logical steps. "Can I ask you something?" I said as we were getting ready to leave. "Sure. Why are you helping me with this? I mean, you barely know me, and this is going to take up your whole weekend." Elena was quiet for a moment, stirring the foam in her coffee cup with a small spoon. "Honestly," she said finally, "I miss having projects to work on with other people. When I was married, we were always fixing something or building something together. It was one of the things I actually enjoyed about the relationship. Since the divorce, I've been doing everything solo, and while I've gotten good at it, it's not as fun." There was something wistful in her voice that made me think there was more to the story, but I didn't push. Instead, I said, "Well, I'm grateful for the help, and who knows, maybe by the end of this, I'll actually know what I'm doing." "That's the spirit," she said with a grin. "Nothing like jumping into the deep end to learn how to swim." We drove back to the neighborhood with the truck full of materials and a plan for tackling the project. As Elena helped me unload everything into our backyard, I realized that what had started as a simple chore had turned into something much more interesting. For the first time since summer break had started, I was actually looking forward to tomorrow. "Meet you at 8?" Elena asked as we finished stacking the lumber. "I'll be here," I said. "And thanks again for all this. I owe you one." "Just promise me you'll actually finish the project," she said with mock seriousness. "I have a reputation to maintain in this neighborhood." As she headed back to her own yard, I found myself watching her go, struck by how much my day had changed from what I'd expected when I first picked up that hammer. Something told me this fence repair was going to be about more than just fixing a boundary between our properties. The next morning arrived with the kind of crisp clarity that only comes with Colorado summer days. I was already outside by 7:30, arranging tools, and mentally rehearsing the steps Elena had outlined the day before. The pile of lumber sat like a promise of transformation, and I found myself checking the gate between our yards every few minutes, waiting for her to appear. She emerged at exactly 8 o'clock, carrying a thermos of coffee and wearing work clothes that somehow looked more stylish than my best outfit. Dark jeans that had clearly seen actual work, a fitted gray t-shirt, and boots that were scuffed in all the right places. Her hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, but a few strands had already escaped to frame her face. "Morning, construction partner," she called out, her voice carrying that same warmth I'd noticed the day before. "Ready to turn this eyesore into something respectable?" "Born ready," I replied, though my confidence was mostly manufactured. The truth was, I'd spent half the night watching YouTube videos about fence construction and was still feeling overwhelmed by the scope of what we were attempting. Elena surveyed our workspace with the methodical approach of someone who'd learned to plan before acting. She walked the length of the damaged section, occasionally crouching to examine joints or test the stability of questionable boards. There was something almost meditative about watching her work, the way she seemed to absorb information through her fingertips. "Okay," she said finally. "Let's start with the worst section. These 3 posts are completely shot." She indicated the area where the fence had developed an alarming lean. "We'll remove everything from here to here, then work our way along." The first hour was pure demolition, and it turned out to be surprisingly satisfying. There's something cathartic about taking apart something that's already broken, especially when you know you're going to build it back better. Elena attacked the project with an energy that bordered on fierce, wielding a crowbar like she was settling an old score with the deteriorating wood. "You're enjoying this way too much," I observed as she pried loose a particularly stubborn board, with what could only be described as glee. "Guilty as charged," she said, pausing to wipe sweat from her forehead. "There's something therapeutic about destruction when it's productive. Plus, this fence has been mocking me for months every time I looked out my kitchen window." As we worked, Elena began sharing stories that filled in the gaps of her life. She'd moved to Cedar Falls 5 years ago, after her divorce was finalized, choosing the town specifically because she didn't know anyone there. Her marriage had ended not with drama or betrayal, but with the slow realization that she and her ex-husband had grown into completely different people who wanted completely different lives. "He was a good man," she said as we loaded broken boards into a wheelbarrow. "Still is, probably. We just stopped making sense together. He wanted predictability, routine, the same vacation spot every year. I wanted adventure, spontaneity, new experiences." She shrugged. Neither of us was wrong, but we weren't right for each other anymore. I found myself fascinated by how matter-of-factly she discussed something that must have been painful. "Do you regret it? The divorce, I mean." "Some days," she admitted. "Not the decision itself, but the timing. We probably should have recognized we were growing apart years before we actually did something about it. We wasted a lot of time trying to force something that had naturally run its course." She looked over at me with a slight smile. "Sorry, that's probably more philosophical than you bargained for at 8 in the morning." "Actually, I like it," I said, surprising myself with my honesty. "Most adults don't talk about real stuff. It's all weather and work complaints. Well, get ready for more real stuff, because I'm apparently in a sharing mood today." As the morning progressed, our conversation ranged across an unexpected variety of topics. Elena asked about my college plans, and I found myself explaining my uncertainty about my major with more detail than I'd shared with my parents. I was leaning toward architecture, drawn by the idea of creating spaces that people would actually use and enjoy, but worried about the practical realities of the profession. "You know," Elena said as we began digging the first post hole, "architecture is just problem-solving with aesthetics. Every building is essentially a series of questions. How do people move through space? What makes them feel comfortable? How do you balance function with beauty?" She gestured toward her house. When I was looking for a place after the divorce, I must have toured 30 houses. Most of them were technically fine, but they didn't feel right. This one spoke to me because someone had thought about the details. She pointed out features I'd never noticed: the way the front porch was positioned to catch morning light, the placement of windows to create cross breezes, the subtle slope of the driveway that prevented water from pooling near the foundation. Her observations revealed an eye for design that went beyond simple aesthetics to consider how spaces actually worked for the people who inhabited them. I never thought about houses that way, I admitted. I always just saw them as places to sleep and eat. That's because you've probably never lived in a badly designed space, Elena said. Trust me. Spend a winter in a house where the architect didn't think about window placement or airflow, and you'll develop strong opinions about design very quickly. The physical work created a rhythm that made conversation feel natural rather than forced. We'd work in companionable silence for stretches, focused on the immediate task, then talk through the easier parts of the job. Elena had opinions about everything: politics, books, movies, food. But she expressed them in ways that invited discussion rather than argument. She seemed genuinely interested in my perspectives, even when they differed from her own. Can I ask you something personal? I said as we took a break around 11, sitting in the shade with bottles of water Elena had brought from her house. Shoot. What made you choose graphic design? It seems like you have a lot of other interests. Elena laughed. Honestly, I fell into it by accident. I was an art major in college, but I had no idea what I wanted to do with that degree. My senior year, I took a digital design class as an elective, thinking it would be easy. Turned out I had a knack for it, and more importantly, it was something I could do freelance. She took a sip of water. Freedom was the selling point. I could work from anywhere, set my own schedule, choose my own clients. Do you like it? Most of the time. It's creative enough to keep me interested, but stable enough to pay the bills. Though lately, I've been thinking about branching out, maybe taking on some interior design projects. This house has been my testing ground for ideas. She described some of the changes she'd made since moving in. Opening up walls to create better flow between rooms, redesigning the kitchen to maximize both function and natural light, transforming the basement into a workspace that felt more like a studio than a cave. Each project had taught her something new about the relationship between space and daily life. Would you want to see what I've done inside? She asked. I mean, if you're interested in architecture and design, it might give you some ideas about how theory translates to practice. I was curious about her house. The glimpses I'd gotten through the windows suggested someone with a strong design sense. But something about the invitation made me hesitate. Not because I didn't want to see it, but because accepting felt like crossing some invisible line from neighbors helping each other to something more personal. Elena seemed to sense my uncertainty. We don't have to, she said quickly. I know it's probably weird, getting the grand tour from your middle-aged neighbor. It's not weird, I said, realizing as I spoke that it wasn't. I'd like to see it. I'm just not used to adults treating me like someone whose opinion matters. Well, get used to it, she said with a grin. I'm not interested in talking down to people just because they're younger than me. Age doesn't automatically equal wisdom, and youth doesn't automatically equal ignorance. We spent the rest of the morning alternating between fence work and conversation. Elena shared more about her design philosophy, her frustrations with difficult clients, and her dreams of someday designing spaces that prioritize sustainability and community connection. I found myself talking about things I rarely discussed with anyone. My concerns about choosing the right career path, my frustration with how impersonal college felt, my desire to do work that felt meaningful rather than just profitable. You remind me of myself at your age, Elena said, as we prepared to break for lunch. Not satisfied with surface-level answers, always looking for deeper meaning. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? It's a complicated thing, she said with a laugh. It means you'll probably never be completely satisfied with easy choices. But it also means you'll end up living a more authentic life than most people. Around noon, Elena suggested we take a proper break and grab lunch. There's a sandwich place downtown that does this amazing turkey and avocado thing, she said. My treat, since you're providing the labor. You don't have to do that, I protested. I want to, she said firmly. Besides, we need to let those post holes settle before we start mixing concrete. Might as well do it somewhere with air conditioning. The sandwich shop turned out to be another one of those local places I'd never paid attention to, despite driving past it regularly. Elena was clearly a regular. The woman behind the counter greeted her by name and asked about her latest project. It was the kind of easy familiarity that suggested genuine community connection rather than mere recognition. We found a table near the window and Elena insisted I try her favorite sandwich combination. She was right about it being amazing. The kind of simple perfection that comes from using quality ingredients without overcomplicating things. As we ate, our conversation shifted to more personal territory. "Can I ask you something?" Elena said, playing with the straw in her iced tea. "What do your parents think about you spending your summer helping the neighbor lady with home improvement projects?" "They think it's great," I said. "My mom's always trying to get me to be more social. And my dad approves of anything that involves manual labor and learning practical skills." I paused. "Why?" "Just curious. Sometimes parents get weird about their kids spending time with adults they don't know well. They're pretty relaxed about that stuff. Plus, my mom likes you. She's mentioned a few times that she wishes she could keep her garden looking as good as yours." Elena smiled at that. "Your mom seems lovely. Very warm. Very genuine. I keep meaning to introduce myself properly, but I'm terrible at the whole neighborhood social thing. She'd love that. She's always complaining that the neighborhood doesn't feel like a real community." "Maybe I'll stop by later this week," Elena said. "I could use some advice about which plants work best in this climate." After lunch, we returned to the fence project with renewed energy. The afternoon work was more technical, measuring and cutting new boards, mixing concrete for the post foundations, ensuring everything was level and properly aligned. Elena proved to be an excellent teacher, explaining each step clearly and patiently correcting my mistakes without making me feel incompetent. "The key to good construction," she said as we worked on getting a post perfectly vertical, "is understanding that precision in the beginning saves you from problems later. Take the time to get it right now, and everything else will fall into place." As the day wore on, I began to notice things about Elena that went beyond her obvious competence with tools and construction. She had a way of moving through physical tasks that suggested someone comfortable in her own body, confident in her abilities without being show-offy about it. When she concentrated on a particularly tricky measurement, she had this habit of biting her lower lip that was oddly endearing. And when she laughed, which she did frequently, it was the kind of genuine, unguarded sound that made you want to keep saying funny things just to hear it again. By mid-afternoon, we had successfully removed all the damaged sections and installed 2 of the 3 replacement posts. The work was going faster than either of us had expected, partly because Elena's planning had been so thorough, but mostly because we'd fallen into an easy working rhythm that felt surprisingly natural. "Not bad for a day's work," Elena said, stepping back to survey our progress. "Tomorrow we can finish the last post and start putting up the new boards." "This is actually kind of fun," I admitted. "I mean, it's work, but good work. Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense," Elena said. "There's something satisfying about physical labor when you can see the results of your effort. Most of my regular work is so abstract: pixels on a screen, client approvals, digital files. This is tangible." As we cleaned up tools and covered the materials with a tarp, Elena made an observation that surprised me. "You know, Tyler, you're good at this. Not just the physical work, but the problem-solving part. You see how different pieces fit together?" "Really?" "Really. You might want to consider that when you're thinking about college majors. Engineering, architecture, construction management, they all involve the same kind of spatial thinking. You've been doing today." Her words carried more weight than she probably realized. Here was an adult who barely knew me, but who was paying attention to my capabilities and offering encouragement based on actual observation rather than generic cheerleading. It felt different from the well-meaning but vague support I usually got from family. "Thanks," I said. "That means a lot, coming from someone who actually knows what they're talking about." "I'm serious about it," Elena said. "You've got good instincts for this kind of work." As she headed back toward her house, Elena paused at the gate between our yards. "Same time tomorrow?" she asked. "Definitely," I replied. "This has been the best day I've had all summer." "Mine too," she said, and something in her tone made me think she meant it as more than just politeness. That evening, as I showered off the day's dust and sweat, I found myself thinking about Elena in ways that felt new and slightly confusing. It wasn't just that she was attractive, though she definitely was, but something about the combination of her competence, her willingness to share real thoughts instead of small talk, and her genuine interest in treating me like an equal created a kind of magnetic pull I'd never experienced before. I was 19 years old, and for the first time in my life, I was beginning to understand what people meant when they talked about chemistry between two people. The problem was, I had no idea what to do with that understanding. The second day of fence work began differently than the first. I arrived early again, but this time Elena was already waiting, sitting on her back porch with 2 steaming mugs and what appeared to be homemade muffins arranged on a small plate. She'd changed out of her usual work clothes into something softer, a cream-colored sweater that brought out the warmth in her brown eyes and jeans that looked newer, less utilitarian. "Good morning, partner," she called out, raising one of the mugs in greeting. "I thought we deserved a proper breakfast before we tackle the final stretch." The muffins turned out to be blueberry with some kind of citrus glaze that made them taste like something from an expensive bakery. I found myself wondering if Elena had gotten up early to bake them specifically for our work session, and if so, what that might mean. "These are incredible," I said around a mouthful of muffin. "Did you really make these yourself?" "Guilty," she said with a pleased smile. "I've been experimenting with baking lately. It's another one of those hands-on activities that helps balance out all the screen time." She settled into the chair across from me, curling her legs beneath her. "Plus, I had extra energy last night and needed something to do with it. There was something intimate about sharing breakfast on her porch, the morning air still cool and the neighborhood quiet except for distant sounds of other people beginning their days." Elena had arranged everything thoughtfully: cloth napkins instead of paper, real mugs instead of disposable cups, even a small vase with flowers from her garden. It felt deliberate in a way that made my stomach flutter with something that wasn't quite nervousness, but wasn't entirely comfortable either. "So," she said, settling back with her coffee, "tell me about your family. I feel like I've been doing all the talking about personal stuff." I found myself describing my parents and younger sister with more detail than the question really required. My dad worked as an accountant for a local firm. Steady, reliable, the kind of man who believed in hard work and fiscal responsibility. My mom taught 3rd grade and volunteered for half a dozen community organizations, always trying to make the world a little better through small, persistent efforts. My sister Emma was 16 and everything I wasn't: outgoing, confident, already planning her senior year social calendar despite being a junior. "They sound wonderful," Elena said. "Very grounded, very stable. That's not always easy to find." "Sometimes I think they're too stable," I admitted. "Like, they've never taken a risk in their entire lives. Dad's worked the same job for 15 years, Mom's taught at the same school for 12. They vacation at the same lake house every summer, shop at the same grocery store, have the same friends they've had since college. And that bothers you?" "Not bothers, exactly. But I worry about ending up like that, you know? Just settled, never really challenging myself or trying anything new." Elena studied me over the rim of her mug, her expression thoughtful. "There's nothing wrong with stability, Tyler. But there's also nothing wrong with wanting more than that. The trick is figuring out how to build a life that has both security and adventure. Is that what you were trying to do? With your marriage?" She was quiet for a long moment, and I worried I'd pushed too far into personal territory. But when she spoke, her voice was reflective rather than defensive. "I thought I was," she said. "But I realize now that I was trying to have an adventure within the constraints of someone else's idea of security. My ex-husband needed routine, predictability. He got anxious when plans changed, or when I wanted to try something spontaneous. So I kept making myself smaller, quieter, more contained." She looked directly at me. "Don't ever do that, Tyler. Don't reshape yourself to fit someone else's limitations." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of my mom's voice calling my name from our backyard. Elena and I exchanged a quick glance, the kind of look that acknowledged we'd been caught in a moment that felt more private than it probably should have. "Tyler? Are you over there?" Mom's voice carried a note of curiosity that suggested she was wondering why I was having breakfast at the neighbor's house instead of my own. "Coming, Mom," I called back, then turned to Elena. "I should probably go see what she needs." "Of course," Elena said, but I caught something that might have been a disappointment flash across her face. "We can start on the fence whenever you're ready." My mom was standing by our back door, still in her bathrobe and holding her own mug of coffee. She had that expression she got when she was trying to figure out how to ask something without seeming nosy. "Having breakfast with Mrs. Hartwell?" she asked. aiming for casual and missing by a mile. Elena, I corrected automatically. And yeah, she made muffins. We were just planning out today's work. That's nice of her, Mom said, though her tone suggested she wasn't entirely sure it was normal neighbor behavior. How's the fence project? Going? Really well. We should finish today, maybe tomorrow morning at the latest. I studied her face, trying to read what she was really asking. Is everything okay? Oh, everything's fine, she said quickly. Well, your father and I were talking last night, and we realized we don't really know much about Mrs. Hartwell. Elena. She keeps to herself quite a bit. There it was, the concern I'd been sensing. She's nice, Mom. Really nice. And she knows what she's doing with construction stuff. I'm learning a lot. I'm sure you are, Mom said. It's just that she's quite a bit older than you, and I want to make sure. She trailed off, clearly struggling with how to voice her concerns without sounding accusatory. Make sure what? Just that you're being appropriate. She's a grown woman, Tyler, and you're still a teenager. Sometimes these situations can get complicated in ways that young people don't anticipate. I felt heat rise in my cheeks, partly from embarrassment and partly from irritation. Mom, we're fixing a fence. That's it. She's helping me learn how to use tools properly and not screw up a major home improvement project. I know, sweetheart. I'm not suggesting anything inappropriate is happening. I just want you to be aware that adults and teenagers sometimes see relationships differently, even when they start out as simple friendships. The conversation was making me uncomfortable in ways I couldn't entirely articulate. Mom wasn't wrong. There was something developing between Elena and me that felt different from a typical neighbor relationship, but her warnings also felt like an intrusion into something that was becoming important to me. Can I just finish the fence project? I asked. We're almost done, and I promised I'd help her complete it. Of course, Mom said, softening her tone. I'm not trying to stop you from helping. I just want you to be thoughtful about boundaries. The exchange left me unsettled as I returned to Elena's yard. She was already working, having changed back into her construction clothes and begun organizing tools for the day's tasks. If she'd overheard any of my conversation with Mom, she didn't show it. Everything all right? She asked without looking up from the level she was adjusting. Yeah, just normal mom stuff, I said, hoping my voice sounded more casual than I felt. We worked steadily through the morning, installing the final post and beginning the process of attaching new fence boards. The physical labor helped dissipate some of the awkwardness from the earlier conversation, but I found myself hyper-aware of every interaction with Elena. When she stood close to show me the proper technique for driving screws, I noticed the faint scent of her perfume. When our hands accidentally touched while we were both reaching for the same tool, I felt an electric shock that had nothing to do with static electricity. Around mid-morning, Elena suggested we take a break and offered to show me the interior design work she'd mentioned the day before. This time, I accepted without hesitation, curious to see how she'd transformed her space and needing a distraction from my own confused thoughts. Elena's house was a revelation. What had probably started as a standard suburban layout had been opened up and reconfigured into something that felt both sophisticated and welcoming. The front rooms flowed together seamlessly, with carefully chosen furniture and artwork that created distinct spaces without rigid separation. Everything felt intentional but not precious, lived in but not cluttered. This is amazing, I said, genuinely impressed. It's like a completely different house from the outside. That was the goal, Elena said, clearly pleased by my reaction. I wanted to create spaces that actually reflected how I live, not how some developer thought people should live. She walked me through each room, explaining the choices she'd made and the problems she'd solved. The kitchen had been completely reconfigured to maximize natural light and create better flow between cooking, dining, and socializing areas. The living room featured built-in shelving that displayed books and art without looking like a library. Even the bathroom had been transformed with tile work and fixtures that elevated it from purely functional to genuinely beautiful. The bedroom is upstairs, she said as we finished the main floor tour. But that's probably more renovation detail than you need to see. Something in her tone, playful but with an undercurrent I couldn't quite identify, made me wonder if she was testing boundaries or simply being considerate. Either way, I found myself curious about the parts of her house I wasn't being shown. which probably said something about my state of mind that I didn't want to examine too closely. "This is really inspiring," I said as we returned to the kitchen. "It makes me think differently about what's possible with interior space." "That's exactly what good design should do," Elena said. "Challenge your assumptions about how things have to be." She poured glasses of iced tea, and we sat at her kitchen island, a beautiful piece she'd had custom-made from reclaimed wood. The afternoon light streaming through the windows created patterns on the countertop that shifted and changed as clouds moved across the sky. "Can I ask you something?" Elena said, her fingers tracing patterns on the wood grain. "What did your mom want to talk to you about earlier?" The directness of the question caught me off guard. How did you know she wanted to talk about something specific? I've been a parent figure to enough young people to recognize that particular tone of voice, Elena said with a slight smile. "Plus, you've been different since you came back. More distant." I debated how much to share, but something about Elena's straightforward approach made evasion feel foolish. She was asking about us, about the time we've been spending together. I think she's worried about, I don't know, boundaries or something. Elena nodded slowly, as if she'd been expecting this. "She's being a good mother. It's natural for parents to be concerned when their teenagers start spending significant time with an adult they don't know well." "Are you offended?" "Not at all. If anything, it shows she cares about you and wants to protect you. That's admirable." Elena paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. "Though I have to admit, it does make me wonder if we should be more careful about how we interact." "What do you mean?" "I mean that your mother isn't entirely wrong to be concerned. There is something happening between us, Tyler. I'd be lying if I said there wasn't." Elena looked directly at me, her expression serious. "The question is what we do about it." Her words hung in the air between us. Acknowledgement of something we'd both been feeling but hadn't articulated. I felt my heart rate accelerate, partly from excitement, and partly from something that might have been fear. "What kind of something?" I asked, my voice smaller than I intended. Elena was quiet for a long moment, studying my face. "The kind of something that could get complicated very quickly," she said finally. "You're 19, Tyler. I'm 49. That's not just an age difference. It's a life experience difference. We're in completely different places. But that doesn't change how we feel, does it?" The words came out before I could stop them, and I immediately felt exposed, vulnerable in a way I'd never experienced before. "No," Elena said softly. "It doesn't change how we feel. But it does change what we should do about those feelings." We sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of acknowledged attraction settling between us like a third presence in the room. I found myself studying Elena's profile as she stared out the window, memorizing the curve of her jaw, the way afternoon light caught the subtle highlights in her hair. "We should probably finish the fence," she said eventually, though she made no move to get up. "Probably," I agreed, also staying put. When we finally returned to the backyard, the dynamic between us had shifted in ways both subtle and profound. We worked efficiently, but there was a new awareness in every interaction. The brush of fingers when handing off tools, the way Elena's guidance in proper technique required her to stand closer than strictly necessary. The moments when I caught her watching me with an expression I couldn't quite decode. By late afternoon, we had completed the fence installation except for final details like gate hardware and protective staining. The transformation was dramatic. What had been a sagging, weathered eyesore was now a clean, sturdy boundary that enhanced both our properties. "We did good work," Elena said, standing back to admire our accomplishment. "We did," I agreed. Though I found myself more focused on Elena than on the fence. The physical labor had brought color to her cheeks and caused a few strands of hair to escape her ponytail in ways that made her look younger, more carefree. As we cleaned up tools and prepared to call it a day, Elena made an observation that would prove more significant than either of us realized at the time. "You know, Tyler," she said, coiling extension cord with practiced efficiency, "you should be proud of what you've accomplished here. Not just the fence, but the whole process. You took on something challenging, asked for help when you needed it, and saw it through to completion. That's actually pretty mature behavior." "Thanks to having a good teacher," I replied. "No," Elena said firmly. "I provided guidance, but you did the work, You made the decisions, solved the problems, pushed through when things got difficult. Give yourself credit. Standing there in the golden light of late afternoon, tools scattered around us and the evidence of our collaboration stretching along the property line, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't just Elena's praise, though that mattered more than I could articulate. It was the realization that for the first time in my life, an adult was seeing me, really seeing me, as capable of more than I'd believed about myself. Elena, I started, not entirely sure what I wanted to say. Yeah? Thank you. For all of this. The help with the fence, the conversations, treating me like someone worth talking to. She stepped closer, close enough that I could see gold, flecks in her brown eyes. Tyler, you are absolutely someone worth talking to. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. And then, before I could process what was happening, she reached up and brushed sawdust from my cheek, her hand lingering against my skin for just a moment longer than necessary. The touch was gentle, almost maternal, but the look in her eyes was something else entirely. I should go clean up, she said, her voice slightly unsteady. Big day tomorrow. As she headed toward her house, I stood frozen in place, my cheek still, tingling from her touch. From somewhere behind me, I heard the sound of our back door opening and my dad's voice calling my name. But it seemed to come from very far away. Everything was about to get much more complicated. My dad's timing couldn't have been worse. Or perhaps, depending on your perspective, it couldn't have been better. As Elena disappeared into her house, and I stood there touching my cheek where her hand had been, Dad emerged from our back door with that particular expression he wore when he had something serious to discuss. Not angry exactly, but purposeful in a way that immediately put me on guard. Tyler, he called, walking across the yard toward me. Can we talk for a minute? I glanced toward Elena's house, hoping she might reappear and provide some buffer against whatever conversation was coming, but her windows remained empty. The tools scattered around our feet suddenly felt like evidence of something I wasn't sure I could explain. Sure, Dad. What's up? He surveyed the completed fencework, nodding approvingly at the craftsmanship. This looks professional. You two did excellent work. His tone was genuinely appreciative, which somehow made what came next feel worse. Your mother mentioned you've been spending quite a bit of time over here. Elena's been teaching me about construction, I said, immediately recognizing how defensive I sounded. I've learned more about home improvement in 2 days than I knew in my entire life. I'm sure you have, Dad said. Elena Hartwell has quite a reputation in this neighborhood. Something in his tone made my stomach drop. What kind of reputation? Dad looked uncomfortable, running his hand through his hair in a gesture I recognized as his tell when he was about to say something unpleasant. Son, there are some things you should know about your new friend. Things that might help you understand why your mother and I are concerned. What are you talking about? Sit down, Dad said, gesturing toward the porch steps. This is going to take a few minutes. I remained standing, suddenly unwilling to make myself vulnerable by sitting while he loomed over me. Just tell me, Dad, he sighed heavily. Elena moved here 5 years ago, right after her divorce. At first, she seemed like any other new neighbor, quiet, polite, kept to herself, but over time a pattern emerged. What pattern? She has a history of developing inappropriate relationships with younger men in the neighborhood. Not teenagers, he added quickly, but men significantly younger than herself. College-aged guys, men in their early 20s. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. That's just gossip. I wish it were, Dad said grimly. 3 years ago, she had an affair with Jake Morrison. You remember Jake, Morrison's oldest son? He was 22, home from college for the summer. His parents found out and there was a huge scene. The family almost moved because of it. You don't know what really happened, I protested, even as my mind began racing through every interaction Elena and I had shared, looking for signs I might have missed. 2 years before that, it was Michael Chen from the next block over, 24 years old, recently graduated, living at home while he looked for work. Same pattern. She befriended him, offered to help with various projects, and before anyone realized what was happening, they were having a full-blown relationship. Each revelation felt like another weight settling on my chest. Even if that's true, it doesn't mean— Tyler, Dad interrupted gently. I'm telling you this because I care about you, not because I want to hurt you. Elena Hartwell is a beautiful, intelligent woman who knows exactly how to make young men feel special, feel seen in ways they've never experienced before. But she's also a predator. Don't call her that, I snapped, surprising both of us with the vehemence in my voice. Dad studied my face, and I watched understanding dawn in his expression. Oh, son, it's already started, hasn't it? Nothing started, I said, but the words felt hollow even to me. Tyler, look at me. Dad's voice carried the same tone he'd used when I was 8, and had broken Mom's favorite vase. Firm, but not unkind. Has Elena made you feel special? Like you're more mature than other guys your age? Has she shared personal details about her life, her marriage, her feelings? I wanted to deny it, but every question hit home with uncomfortable accuracy. She's been nice to me. There's nothing wrong with that. Has she touched you? Casual touches that seemed innocent but felt different. Somehow, the memory of her hand on my cheek felt like it was burning through my skin. You're making something dirty out of friendship. I'm trying to protect you from making a mistake that could follow you for years, Dad said. Elena Hartwell has a pattern, Tyler. She targets young men who are at transitional points in their lives, between high school and college, between college and career, times when they're questioning themselves and their place in the world. She makes them feel understood, appreciated, desired. And then, when the relationship inevitably falls apart because of the fundamental imbalance between them, she moves on, and they're left trying to make sense of what happened. That's not what this is, I said, but doubt was beginning to creep into my voice. How do you know? Dad asked. How many relationships have you had with older women? How many 49-year-old divorcees have you spent intimate time with? You have no frame of reference for what's normal and what's manipulation. I wanted to argue, to defend Elena and what we'd shared, but Dad's words were forcing me to examine our interactions through a different lens. Had Elena deliberately sought me out? Had her interest in the fence project been genuine? Or had she seen an opportunity? The breakfast she'd prepared, the tour of her house, the way she'd talked about recognizing something special in me. Was any of it real? Or was I just the latest in a series of young men who'd fallen for the same routine? What happened to the other guys? I asked quietly. Jake Morrison transferred to a college in California. Never came home for more than a day or two after that. Michael Chen moved across the country for a job and hasn't been back since. Both of them left this neighborhood carrying emotional damage that didn't need to happen. The weight of this information settled over me like a cold fog. Everything I'd thought I understood about Elena, about our connection, about my own judgment, suddenly felt uncertain. Why didn't anyone tell me about this before? I asked. Because we hoped it wouldn't be necessary, Dad said. Elena had been quiet for almost 2 years. No incidents, no inappropriate relationships. We thought maybe she'd learned from the previous situations, maybe found healthier ways to deal with whatever drives this behavior. Or maybe those other situations weren't what people thought they were. Dad looked at me with something that might have been pity. Son, I know you want to believe that what you're feeling is special, that your situation is different. That's exactly what makes Elena's behavior so damaging. She has a gift for making each young man feel like he's the exception, like their connection is unique and profound. I thought about Elena's words from earlier, her acknowledgement that something was happening between us, her mature recognition of the complications our age difference created. Had that been genuine wisdom, or sophisticated manipulation designed to make me feel like our situation was different from typical older woman, younger man dynamics? I need to think about this, I said. Of course you do, Dad replied. But Tyler, I'm asking you to be very careful about how much time you spend with Elena going forward. At minimum, don't spend time alone with her. If you want to maintain a friendship, do it in public spaces or when other people are around. The fence project isn't finished, I said weakly. The fence project is finished enough, Dad said firmly. Any remaining work can wait, or Elena can hire a professional contractor. As Dad headed back toward the house, I remained standing in the backyard, staring at the fence that had brought Elena and me together. The evening air carried the scent of her garden, and I could see lights beginning to come on in her windows as the sun set behind the mountains. Everything looked the same as it had an hour ago, but felt completely different. I spent most of the night lying awake, replaying every conversation, every moment, every touch, trying to separate genuine connection from potential manipulation. The problem was, even if Dad was right about Elena's pattern, that didn't necessarily invalidate what I'd experienced with her. Maybe she did make a habit of befriending younger men, but that didn't mean her interest in me was entirely calculated. Maybe she did have poor boundaries, but that didn't mean everything she'd shared about her life was a lie designed to draw me in. By morning, I'd reached a decision. I needed to hear Elena's side of the story before I could make any judgments about our relationship or her character. Whatever the truth was, I owed both of us the chance for an honest conversation. I found Elena in her garden around 9 o'clock, kneeling among the flower beds with a hand cultivator and a small pile of weeds. She looked up when she heard the gate latch, and her smile was so genuinely pleased to see me that my resolve almost wavered. "Good morning," she said, sitting back on her heels. "I was just thinking about you, ready to tackle the final details on the fence?" "Actually," I said, "I was hoping we could talk first." Something in my tone must have alerted her because her expression shifted from casual warmth to careful attention. "Of course. What's on your mind?" "My dad told me some things yesterday. About your history in this neighborhood, about other guys you've been involved with." Elena went very still, the hand cultivator frozen halfway to the ground. For a long moment she didn't respond, and I watched a dozen different emotions cross her face: surprise, hurt, anger, resignation. "I see," she said finally. "And what exactly did your father tell you?" "He said you have a pattern of getting involved with younger men. Jake Morrison, Michael Chen. He said there were scenes, family drama, guys leaving town because of what happened." Elena set down her gardening tool and stood slowly, brushing soil from her knees. "Those are quite serious accusations. Are they true?" She looked at me for a long moment, and I could see her weighing her response. "The facts your father shared are accurate," she said finally. "I did have relationships with both Jake and Michael, but the context he provided is almost certainly incomplete and probably unfair." "Then give me the complete context." Elena walked over to her porch and sat down on the steps, gesturing for me to join her. I remained standing, suddenly unsure about putting myself within arm's reach. "Jake Morrison was 22 when I met him," she began. "He was working construction for the summer, trying to save money for his senior year of college. He was mature, intelligent, and lonely. His parents treated him like he was still in high school, and his girlfriend had broken up with him before. He came home for the summer." "How did you meet him?" "He was working on a renovation project 2 houses down. We started talking over coffee at the same place you and I went yesterday. He was struggling with some major decisions about his future, and I offered perspective based on my own experiences with career changes and life transitions. I could hear echoes of my own situation in her description, which made my stomach tighten with anxiety. The relationship developed gradually," Elena continued. "Coffee conversations became dinner invitations, and spent evenings together talking about books, movies, life plans. He was incredibly thoughtful, surprisingly well-read for someone his age, and yes, I was attracted to him." "What happened?" "We became lovers," Elena said simply. "It lasted about 6 weeks. It ended when his parents found out and made it clear that he would have to choose between maintaining a relationship with me and maintaining a relationship with his family." "And Michael Chen?" "Similar story, different details. Michael was brilliant, computer science degree from MIT, but struggling to find his place in the world after graduation. He was working part-time at a tech startup and living with his parents while he figured out his next steps. We met at the library, started talking about books, began spending time together." Elena paused, looking out at her garden. "Michael and I were together for almost 3 months. We talked about him moving out of his parents' house, maybe moving in with me. But when his family found out about our relationship, they threatened to cut off all support unless he ended things immediately." "So, in both cases, family pressure ended the relationships?" "In both cases, young men who weren't yet financially independent were forced to choose between love and family support," Elena corrected. "It's not quite the same thing." I found myself wondering if there were details Elena was leaving out. context that might change how I interpreted these stories. What about the part where people say you target younger men? Is there a pattern? Elena was quiet for a long time before responding. Tyler, I'm 49 years old. I've been divorced for 5 years. In that time, I've had exactly 3 relationships, with Jake, with Michael, and now whatever this is with you. That's not exactly a pattern of predatory behavior. But all 3 were significantly younger. All 3 were men I met organically through normal activities who happened to be younger than me, Elena said. I didn't seek them out because of their age. I didn't manipulate them into relationships. I was honest about who I am and what I was looking for. What were you looking for? Connection, Elena said simply. Intellectual compatibility. Someone who saw the world with fresh eyes instead of cynicism. Someone who wasn't carrying decades of baggage from previous relationships. Her words stung because they felt designed to flatter me, to make me feel special in exactly the way Dad had warned me about. But they also rang true in ways that made me question whether Dad's interpretation of Elena's behavior was entirely fair. The thing is, I said, even if your version is completely accurate, it doesn't change the fact that these relationships caused problems for everyone involved, including you. No, Elena admitted. It doesn't change that. But it also doesn't mean the relationships were wrong or harmful or predatory. Sometimes good things end badly because of circumstances beyond anyone's control. We sat in silence for several minutes, each lost in our own thoughts. I found myself torn between wanting to believe Elena's version of events and recognizing that even her honest account revealed a pattern that seemed problematic. Maybe she wasn't deliberately targeting younger men, but she was consistently finding herself in relationships with significant power imbalances that seemed destined to end poorly. Tyler, Elena said finally, what do you want to do with this information? It was exactly the right question and exactly the wrong time to ask it. I don't know, I admitted. I don't know how to tell the difference between genuine connection and manipulation. I don't know whether you're being honest with me or telling me what you think I want to hear. I don't know if what I'm feeling is real or just hormones and inexperience. Those are fair concerns, Elena said, and mature ones. The fact that you're asking these questions suggests you're thinking about this situation more carefully than either Jake or Michael did. Is that supposed to make me feel better? It's supposed to acknowledge that you're handling a complex situation with more wisdom than anyone has a right to expect from a 19-year-old. And there it was again. The subtle flattery that made me feel seen and special while simultaneously making me question whether that feeling was genuine or manufactured. Elena, I said, I need some time to think about all this, to figure out what I actually feel versus what I think I'm supposed to feel. Of course, she said, though I caught something that looked like disappointment in her expression. Take all the time you need. As I walked back toward my own house, I heard Elena call my name. When I turned around, she was standing at the edge of her garden, looking smaller and more vulnerable than I'd ever seen her. Tyler, she said, whatever you decide about us, I want you to know that nothing about our connection has been calculated or manipulative. You've reminded me what it feels like to be excited about life again, to look forward to conversations and shared experiences. That's not something I've felt in a very long time, and it's not something I take lightly. Her words followed me into the house, where I found both my parents waiting in the kitchen with expressions that suggested they'd been discussing me extensively. The conversation that followed would change everything. But in that moment, all I could think about was the way Elena had looked standing in her garden. Beautiful, lonely, and possibly dangerous in ways I was only beginning to understand. The kitchen conversation with my parents felt like an intervention disguised as a family meeting. Mom had made coffee and arranged store-bought cookies on a plate, the kind of forced domesticity that appeared whenever she was trying to soften difficult conversations. Dad sat across from me with his hands folded, wearing the expression he reserved for serious financial discussions or major life decisions. How did it go? Mom asked, settling into her chair with careful precision. She didn't deny it, I said, surprised by how hollow my own voice sounded. She admitted to relationships with both guys Dad mentioned, but she says the situation was different from how everyone interpreted it. Different how? Dad asked, his tone suggesting he'd already decided Elena's explanations weren't worth considering. I found myself in the uncomfortable position of defending someone I wasn't sure I believed, while simultaneously trying to process my own doubts. She says they were genuine relationships that ended because of family pressure, not because she was manipulating anyone. Mom exchanged a glance with Dad that carried decades of marital communication. Tyler, honey, that's exactly what someone would say if they were trying to justify inappropriate behavior. But it's also what someone would say if they were telling the truth, I countered, even as I recognized the weakness in my own argument. Let me ask you something, Dad said, leaning forward. In all your conversations with Elena, did she ever ask about your college plans, your relationship experience, your family dynamics? The questions hit like physical blows because the answer was yes to all of them. Elena had shown genuine interest in every aspect of my life, asking thoughtful follow-up questions and offering insights that had made me feel understood in ways I'd never experienced before. She was being friendly, I said weakly. Or she was gathering information, Mom replied gently. Learning about your vulnerabilities, your insecurities, the areas where you might be most receptive to adult attention and validation. I wanted to argue, but doubt was spreading through my certainty like cracks in ice. Had Elena's interest in my architectural ambitions been genuine mentorship? Or had she recognized someone uncertain about his future, who might be flattered by experienced adult guidance? Had her stories about her marriage and divorce been honest sharing, or calculated revelation designed to create artificial intimacy? Even if you're right about her motivations, I said, that doesn't change what I felt. What I still feel. No. One's questioning your feelings, Dad said. But feelings aren't always based on accurate information. If someone creates artificial circumstances designed to generate specific emotional responses, those feelings can be real without being authentic. The distinction felt important in ways I couldn't fully articulate. Real, but not authentic. Was that what had happened between Elena and me? Had my emotional experience been genuine while the foundation it was built on was deliberately constructed? What do you want me to do? I asked. We want you to end contact with Elena, Mom said. Completely. No more fence work, no more conversations, no more time spent together in any context. That seems extreme. Tyler, Dad said, I need you to understand something. Elena Hartwell is 30 years older than you. She's been married, divorced, and has had multiple relationships with men closer to your age than hers. You're 19, years old with limited relationship experience. The power imbalance in this situation is significant, and it's not in your favor. I'm not a child, I protested. No, but you're not fully an adult either, Mom said. Your brain is still developing. Your emotional regulation, your ability to assess risk and consequences, your understanding of complex relationship dynamics, these are all still maturing. Elena knows this, and if she's pursuing any kind of romantic or sexual relationship with you, she's taking advantage of that developmental reality. A year later, during winter break from college, I ran into Jake Morrison at a coffee shop downtown. He was visiting family for the holidays, and we ended up talking for over an hour about college, career plans, and the strange experience of growing up in a small community where everyone knows everyone else's business. You know, Jake said as we prepared to leave, I heard you had your own situation with Elena Hartwell a while back. Sort of, I said. It didn't go as far as yours did. Probably for the best, Jake replied. Don't get me wrong. Elena's a good person, and what we had was real. But I wasn't ready for that kind of intensity, and she wasn't really looking for someone at my life stage. We were both trying to make something work that was fundamentally mismatched. Do you regret it? Jake thought about it for a moment. I regret how it ended, and I regret the family drama it caused. But I don't regret getting to know her. She taught me things about myself, about relationships, about what I actually wanted in life. Sometimes the most valuable experiences are the ones that don't work out the way you expected. As I drove home from that conversation, I found myself thinking about Elena, wondering where she'd ended up, whether she'd found the fresh start she'd been looking for, whether she'd learned to navigate relationships with better boundary awareness. I hoped she was happy, and I hoped she was making choices that created less complexity for everyone involved. The fence between our old properties was still standing, solid and straight. A reminder that some collaborations produce lasting results, even when the collaboration itself is temporary. Sometimes the most meaningful connections are the ones that teach us about ourselves and then gracefully step aside to make room for what comes next. I never saw Elena again, but I carried forward the lessons she'd helped me learn. About construction and design, about the complexity of adult relationships, about the importance of questioning my own motivations and assumptions. She'd been right about something else too. The ability to see situations from multiple perspectives was indeed one of the most valuable skills I could develop. Years later, as an architect designing spaces for people to live and work and connect with each other, I often thought about Elena's observations about the relationship between physical space and human behavior. Every building is a series of questions about how people move through space, how they interact with each other, how design can either facilitate or complicate the business of living. The summer I spent building a fence with my 49-year-old neighbor had taught me that relationships follow similar principles. They require solid foundations, careful attention to boundaries, and recognition that even the most beautiful structures can become problematic if they're built in the wrong place or at the wrong time. Some connections are meant to be permanent, others are meant to be temporary, and wisdom lies in recognizing the difference. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.